New bikes, the value of it can only go one direction, and that's down. If you sell a new bike for 1,000, you'll make about 300. That's the same amount that I make selling a $400 to $500 bike. I started my shop for less than $10,000.
Let's face it, there is a ton of doom and gloom right now in today's bike industry, with lots of brands and bike shops seemingly going out of business left and right. In this video, we're going to talk with one bike business that is bucking that trend.
To me, it seems like in many ways, it's almost getting easier.
Matt from Recycles Bicycles is flipping the script that a bike shop has to sell super high-end brand new bikes in order to be profitable. We're going to talk about how he started, why he started, and some of the interesting lessons he has learned along the way. The interview was super interesting. There's a lot to learn, a lot of stuff to digest, so let's get into it. Can you give us like a brief overview of how you're different from your typical bike shop?
I was previously an engineer, so I gave up a more than healthy salary for what I believed was going to be, okay, now I'm going to do what I want to do and make way less doing it, but be happier with that decision. And to my surprise, I am outpacing the income that I did previously, which I never would have expected selling used bikes. But as I've picked up some of the more subtle business concepts and just kind of understand that, on the surface, maybe another shop focused on the $10,000 and $15,000 sales, but their margins play into that much more than you would think. And that's kind of the trick of my model, is that even though I don't sell high dollar products, I get excellent margins. And it creates this really cool win-win, because I think the public is a little bit starved for, they want higher quality, but they don't want to start at $1,000 price point.
Right.
And it's not like I'm reinventing anything. Like, people have been buying used cars forever, and there's used car dealerships everywhere, but it just seems like there's not that many used bike dealerships.
Yeah, well, I feel like usually the marketplace for used bikes is something like a Craigslist or Facebook marketplace, but not so much an actual like brick and mortar business. And that's where I think this is kind of really fascinating.
Craigslist is actually how I got my start. I did that for many years. And I want to say, I can't remember when Facebook Marketplace became a thing, but that sort of took over maybe 2011, 2012. But still to this day, I mean, sometimes we make postings on Craigslist, and I'll even have people come in and they'll say, hey, I bought a bike from you 12 years ago. Like, people, there's almost like a cult-like following with things on Craigslist where people remember.
Right.
There's other people out there that sell used bikes, but not taking it all the way to having a brick and mortar shop. They just do it on the side. I've met some people that are doing this full time, not out of a shop. And it's really fascinating, because they're just kind of hiding out there unless you are on Craigslist or you're on Facebook Marketplace in this local area. You know about these people. There's a lot of used bikes out there that would otherwise end up in a dump. And if you just have the skills to give them a little TLC, they can last quite a bit longer.
At what point did you realize like this could be a real business beyond just like a hobby business in a garage?
I started in college, and I distinctly remember I bought my first bike for $125 at a yard sale, and I sold it 2 days later for $250. And at the time, I was actually working at a shop in Morgantown, West Virginia, where I went to school, and I was making $6 an hour there. Which makes me sound a lot older than I am, but I guess the minimum wage is just lower over there. It's just an eye opener, not in like, I'm going to do this for a living, but like, I just made what typically takes me 10, 15 hours worth of labor.
Right.
So it kind of got me into, well, what if I learned how to fix these things? Because I was familiar a little bit with like what brands were popular, and I maybe had 6 months experience under my belt in a shop as somebody who was just building bikes in the back. But I quickly realized it's like, somebody has something in their garage that has a flat tire, that has a broken cable, that has worn down brake pads. It might be a simple job to somebody who does it every day, but to the person whose garage space that is taking up, you're essentially doing them a favor by clearing out the space. And again, that's where the business kind of started to take off. Is I was able to get in at a really low risk point. There's a lot of people out there that start local businesses and they'll take small business loans for $100,000 plus. And kudos to them because they have a whole lot more bravery than I do. I don't think I could have really taken that leap without this being a model that lends itself to being able to start with cash, really low risk. I started my shop for less than $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Which most people, they are like, if you Google how much does it take to start a bike shop, you'll get answers anywhere between like 80,000 and 250,000. And when I look at that, I'm like, well, yeah, would I have taken a lien out on my house to start this? Probably not. Anyways, it feels like something I've stumbled into by accident. I thought of it as a hobby for a long time until my phone was just getting busy to the point where I was coming home from my day job and I found myself working on other people's bikes till 9 or 10 at night. And it started to push on me more and more of like, hey, maybe this isn't the risk that it looks like it is, because I tend to be a pretty risk averse person. But so I don't know. There's a lot of aspects to this that even though admittedly I'm not a big like video person or stage presence person, I felt compelled to start making some videos because it felt like there was some information in my head that if other people could just see how it was done,
Right.
I think there's shops out there that aren't because they believe it's higher risk or less accessible than it is. And at the same time, we are seeing all of this doom and gloom. And I don't know if it's just because it's what gets the clicks or how much of that is reality. Obviously, there have been struggles in a lot of industries with the ups and downs of the pandemic. But it just seems strange to me that there's a net loss of bike shops right now, when to me it seems like in many ways it's almost getting easier.
I know you made a video about this. I forget the specific numbers, but can you talk a little bit about, like the growth in income and how that, what was the progression like from year one to where you are now?
So that is a 10-year story. That is starting on Craigslist, buying stuff from yard sales, picking things up. I was maybe making $5,000 to $10,000 a year on the side, on top of being an engineer. I signed the lease on my space in 2019, in March. So I had one normal season before COVID hit, and I had projected numbers. These are going to sound almost crazy to a lot of people, but I was really like, it was a story of I'm fed up working at a desk. I'm willing to take a massive pay cut in order to do this. So I had projected, let's see if I can make $20,000 the first year. And if I can't grow this to 40,000 after 3 seasons, then maybe that's my sign that this is not going to be long-term sustainable. And so I had very, very modest, kind of a modest goal to start. I ended up making about 55,000 in that first year. And then next year, as we all know, was the largest spike in demand for bicycles probably in human history. Mm-hmm. So that was a wild year. I pulled in something like 140,000, which I had never made half that much money. I tend to be the person that's like, I don't know if it's just like too negative of a mindset. Like, oh, this isn't going to last. Oh, this is temporary. Oh, it's like squeeze the juice out of the lime now because it's going to be gone.
Right.
I think some other people in the industry had a different mindset and they were like, this is the new normal.
Right.
And I just refused to go over the top. I did move from a little 400 square foot space in my building to a 1,000 square foot space where I am now. out of necessity, just because of the volume of bikes coming in and out. But then, as I suspected, things mellowed a little in 2021, and then certainly in 2022. So 2021, I probably pulled in close to 100 again. And then 22, I kind of label that as my fooling around year. I do a lot of bike touring during my off seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2022, I did a lot of trips. I went to Mexico. I went to Iceland. I did a lot of camping locally. I still didn't have any employees. So all of this time meant the shop was closed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I must have took something like 20 weeks of vacation that year, and which obviously reflected in my income because I probably pulled in like 55, 60. And then the last couple years, I've settled into a more consistent workflow, and I'm pulling in right around 1,000 again. There's been a lot of lessons in terms of how to price things, what are appropriate open hours, if you take on employees, how do you balance, scheduling them when you need them, but not having them on so many hours that it's becoming a huge expense.
Right.
So there's a lot of things at play, and it kind of feels like, mixing up a Rubik's Cube. You can fix one side and mess up the other. But I think that over the years, I'm starting to realize where the optimization is with everything. And I've gotten a pretty good balance where I'm making a really strong income, particularly for this industry.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't really work myself to death. I mean, I probably get myself up to about 50 hours a week for the peak 3 months of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, like, I'm a kind of lazy business owner. For 6 months out of the year, I probably don't work more than 30 hours a week. I do prioritize that kind of balance. Somebody else might be able to take this model and run with it much more. If you're the type of personality, it's like, I want to work 60 hours. That's my happy medium. Who knows where you could take this, really? We're getting ready to go into our 7th season. I now have 2 salespeople and a part-time mechanic. And I've just kind of been in that zone of, how do I get the right people in the right places and sort of buy a little bit more of my time back? Start looking at things from a 10,000 foot view instead of boots on the ground. And it's really just been an experiment the whole way. Every decision I make, it's kind of, I think people get it in their head that things are more structured than it is, but it's really Wild West when you run a small business. You can make whatever decisions you want, and you have to live with consequences of them. But at the same time, remember that you can always backtrack on decisions. So it just feels like this really fluid thing, and it's been fun. And I feel like I've learned a couple concepts that could help.
Have you had any Freakonomics experiences where something's been like counterintuitive to what you thought?
Yes. Making the most in sales and selling the most bikes is not necessarily the same thing. And I made a video. I probably will revisit this topic, but I guess as a really easy example, if I sell 100 items of one thing and I make $10 on each of them, then you netted 1,000. But if I sell twice as many, but make only $1 on them, my sales volume doubled, but my profit decreased. And that's a really simplistic example, but that was actually hidden. It took me probably 3 or 4 seasons to start to realize, like, oh, actually, I'm a little underpriced. The volume of sales is really high. And especially for my business, I'm not just pointing and clicking and reordering from Track or Giant or Specialized. I'm sourcing all these bikes individually. And there was a loss of equilibrium where there's more bikes going out than what's coming in. So out of necessity, just to keep good inventory, I raised my prices a little bit to control how many are going out. And then I started to realize, I'm like, I'm selling technically less bikes, but I'm actually more profitable this way. And there's always limits to that, because it's not like I can you know, put everything at 10,000% markup.
Right.
You are always at the mercy of what market price is and what people are willing to pay. But it definitely is good to pay close attention to those types of things,
Hmm.
because I think that's an easy one that people can get caught up in of like, oh, I just need to sell more and more and more. But there's more than just sales volume. There's a couple other things to consider.
What's the margin difference in selling used versus like a new bike?
New right now seems to hover about 30 to 35%. I think that may be different in the really high dollar sales. I'm a little bit less familiar with margins on like a $10,000 bike sale. But as far as I have seen, it's about 30 to 35% generally. So if you sell a bike out of your store for $1,000, the dealer probably paid $650 or $700 for it. Those margins have been slowly but surely shrinking over time. People that I have worked for in the past would tell me about the good old days in the 90s and before where they were making 45 or 50% margin. On the used side, I get about 80% margin on what I sell. So, not that I sell a lot of $1,000 bikes, but a better example would be if I sell a bike for $500, I probably spent about 100 on it. And then the rest of what goes into that is replacement parts as necessary, cleaning it up. And then another part of our strategy is we're really generous with our warranty. Like we have a 5-year warranty on our bikes, and it's almost fun to tell people that because their eyebrows raise every
Right.
time. Like we're constantly battling that stigma of this is a used product. So the hidden hurdle is trust. And as soon as you throw that down, I mean, I wouldn't suggest having a warranty like this if you were selling department store bikes or anything with 2 wheels, but we really focus on what was in the bike shops 10 and 15 years ago. So we have all the same Trek and Specialized and the name brands that people would recognize in a bike store, but it's really just lagging 10 to 20 years into the past, which a lot of these bikes still have plenty of life left in them.
If you were to sell, let's say, one new $1,000 bike, in terms of profit, how many used bikes would you have to sell to match or exceed the sale of that one new bike? Sorry for the interruption, but if you guys have been enjoying this podcast, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. It gives us a budget so we can travel and cover interesting events, as well as it gives us the space to find and interview interesting people. If Patreon is too much, I get it. Check out the merch store, pick up a hat or some stickers. Let's get back to the interview.
So a good comparison is if you sell a new bike for 1,000, you'll make about 300 to 350. That's the same amount that I make selling a $400 to $500 bike.
Yeah.
And at that price point, it's so accessible to so many people that we turn over bikes real quick. When you go in, maybe this won't apply to everybody, but I feel like for more people, $1,000 expense is something to think on a little bit more. We have people that come in and they're not sure if they're looking to buy today or not, but then they're surprised at our prices and they're like, wow, this looks great. You put new tires and grips and all this stuff, and you're telling me it's warranted for 5 years.
Right.
Like, here's $400. This is a great solution. So we get a lot of volume at a point where essentially the profit per sale is equivalent to if we were selling $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 bikes. So it puts us in a pretty good spot. I'd be less versed in understanding the economics behind the shops that really focus on the high end. There may be some clear advantages to that too, where you don't have to move so much volume, but you make a nice amount per sale.
Yeah.
But that's really not what we focus on.
It seems like a pretty good deal if you're a small business and don't want to be over leveraged, like with inventory on hand.
Yeah, there's another hidden perk in that, and this one, I hope I can give justice to this explanation because it is a little bit weird to wrap your head around. If you have a really big business with really large overhead and you operate on a net like 5 to 10% margin, which is a lot of retail in general. What happens if you decide to take off 5% of the time? You lose your entire profit margin. One of the nice things about this model, like a lot of people scratch their heads and they're like, Matt, how are you closing your doors for 2 months to go bike in Mexico or somewhere? And
Right.
it's like, I'm closing for a small percentage of the time during the slow part of the year. And do I give up sales by doing that? Yes. But I don't cannibalize my income in the way that a larger overhead shop would.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives me a nice lever of freedom there.
I also feel like since you're dealing primarily used, you don't have to contend with like the seasonality and having the latest, 2025 model and sell it within that model year before it seems outdated, since your inventory is already kind of classic or vintage,
Right.
per
They're
se.
already all outdated. So I've gotten ahead of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing. So I brought that up in the Surly video. That was quite eye-opening to me. And I don't mean any of this as a knock against Surly. That brand is awesome. It was just interesting to bring in some new bikes and realize like, oh, if I buy too many of these, when the calendar year turns over, I am getting hit with some depreciation. The bikes that I buy, I'm buying them after that depreciation hit. And really, I'm increasing the value through the parts and labor.
Mhm.
But with new bikes, the value of it can only go one direction, and that's down.
Would this make sense to add on to a pre-existing shop, or is this something that has to be from like, the roots of the shop?
I think that there is a place for it. It does depend on the shop. I don't want to make the blanket statement that this would be great for any shop because
Mhm.
there is a lot of variance out there. But if you sell a lot of $1,000 to $1,500 price point, then I think it is an interesting realization that you could offer used bikes in your store at the $400 to $500 price point and make the same amount per sale. It depends on where you're at. The other thing I'll be honest about, there's disadvantages to focusing on used. The workload's higher. So rather than building that bike out of a box, you're doing a full A to Z inspection. And if you are already running a store that has a very busy service center doing thousands of work orders a year, maybe it'd be a little bit less pragmatic for you to start bringing in used bikes. I do know of shops that incorporate it into their winter time when they have more time available to take on projects like that. I think less so than integrating this into existing shops. I aim to present the idea that people can start a used bike shop from the ground up and they don't have to worry about a lot of the hurdles that exist in the typical track of starting take just inventory, for example. Even having 100 bicycles in your store, if you're focusing on lower end, like $800 to $1,200 price point, you're still buying those bikes for $500 to $600 a piece.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 50, 60 grand initial inventory. And that's just one facet of what you need to start your business.
Mm-hmm.
So it really works as a barrier. I think that you could maybe do it the other way around. Like if I wanted to transition to selling new, I could do that. I have the established business. It would be a problem with my name, and I would probably have to change that. And I'm not saying that I have interest in doing so, but if somebody wanted to start a shop used so that they could break into the industry at a lower risk entry point and then transition later, you could certainly do that. I would not recommend calling your shop Recycles Bikes, though, if you're going to do that.
Yeah, that 500 for the to $600 price point is pretty interesting because I feel like in some ways you get more bang for a buck in a used bike than like what you would get for a brand new $500 bike today.
Exactly. It's really, really similar to just buying a used car. And, it depreciates in those first few years. As long as you're not buying a 30-year-old beater, it'll be pretty much the same as buying it new. If you're the second owner of a car that's 3 years old, you're getting it at a much lower price point, and without really introducing the risk of it being too old and beaten down.
What's the line that you draw where you say this bike is, too old to be considered, or it just wouldn't sell well?
We have gotten to the late 80s. So I would say 30 to 35 years, but it does become highly dependent on the wear and tear. So I will definitely draw the line at the, what do you call them? There's a nickname for them, but I don't know if it's friendly to say on a YouTube video. The down tube shifters. I don't know if you know the nickname for them, but people want their shifters up on the handlebars.
Right.
And so we've had a couple of those vintage road bikes, and they'll be in great condition. In fact, I've got one hanging up. It's one of the Trek 2100, like carbon, but it's got down tube shifters, and it'll make some people sad to hear it, but that's probably a candidate for breakdown and use the parts rather than sell the whole bike. Right. Just because that stuff doesn't turn on our floor. So we'll go back generally to about 1990. I would say that our average bicycle is more like 2010, but you never know. I mean, I've had like Specialized rock hoppers come in that are like 1988 and they're in pristine condition. And so I've also had bikes that were 5 years old come in, and they've spent those 5 years in the bottom of a river. And sometimes they're not even salvageable. So it's kind of a funny thing. People think of it in terms of age, but it really comes more down to condition. And then with the cutoff points being antiquated technology that people don't really want to mess with.
Do you find that you sell more drop bar bikes or flat or hybrid style bikes?
Definitely flat and hybrid style. We like to call them Dave and Susan bikes. So like kind of everyday bikes for everyday people. Our typical clientele, they want to keep up with their kids on the rail trail or ride around the neighborhood or get a little bit of cross training with their running. We do carry some road bikes, but even those tend to be entry level. It'll be somebody who's looking to do their first triathlon, or they're really loving their hybrid and they're going out and they're starting to challenge the limits and doing 30 and 40-mile rides. And as they ride with other people, they realize, oh, if I jump onto a road bike, maybe there's a different kind of fun to have here. So we do get that, but I want to say 80% of our sales are pretty run-of-the-mill, entry-level hybrid or mountain bike.
You guys fix up a bike. Do you change the handlebars, or do you just make sure that the cables and the tires are good, or do you do any like major modifications to them?
We do a whole lot of replacing rubber. Okay. That's one of the first things where you'll get even a little bit of dry rot. If you replace the tires, that bike's just going to look and feel so much better. And we're able to purchase those products in large enough bulk because we end up doing it on so many of the bicycles that come in that it makes it economical for us. It does depend on the bike. We do have everything from the trade-in that is in pristine condition that really was never ridden, and it ends up just getting a tuning and cleaning. Mm-hmm. And then we also have the full send projects where we're new cables, housing, rubber, brake pads, saddle, the whole thing. As far as modifications, we do tend to, if we get hybrid or mountain bikes that are a little bit more leaned over, like the hand position is low, mm-hmm. we will do what we can to replace them with either the mustache bars or maybe a riser handlebar. And that's just come from experience. We get these people that come in as part of our sales process. All we're really trying to do is get their butt on a bike. They make the decisions from there, but we just get them to at least try it. We can see how their leg extension looks. They can see how they're comfortable on it. And what we got a lot of in those first few seasons is, oh, wow, this is really leaned over. Mm-hmm. People tend to want to be more upright. And this could be easily be different in different shops where they're targeting different demographics. But for our clientele, they're looking to be comfortable and have fun. They're not looking to race. So we get more of those types of modifications. We'll do less when it comes to like drivetrain components and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just did a shop visit, bike shop slash cafe slash frame building studio.
Oh, cool.
And they had a small selection of used bikes. And it was interesting because I recognized the brands. I was like, those are all road bikes, but they had converted all of them into more swept back. You know, because that's what people wanted. And instead of selling it in its, you know, original spec, they just, you know, swap the bars out completely. For them, it made sense because, you know, they were building like high-end custom frames, but wanted to have some product for entry-level cyclists or for people that, you know, for the local community.
I think that can sometimes be a bit of an emotional hurdle for some shop owners because, like, I ride all drop bar bikes and I like the fancy stuff. And I get excited when that customer comes in, but I never try to make the customer want or, you know, trying to push what I find appealing onto them. I get the draw because you're excited about it, but it really doesn't work. It's kind of a mismatch between the business owner and the customer, depending on the type of shop you are. But I don't know. I think that most people are looking for everyday bikes. If you really think about it, it's maybe a sad realization, but for every bike that sells out of a bike shop, there's 10 or 20 selling out of a department store. Right. And I think that's revealing of something, that the demand for an everyday bike is just that much higher than, and it makes sense. Like, right. There's going to be less people that are really going for the higher end and are really into it. But you got to kind of build that pyramid from the bottom. We do get the customer every once in a while, you know, I don't want to race. I don't want to get into any of this. I just want a basic hybrid. They come back 2 years later and they're riding 250 miles a week.
Right.
And you almost don't even like recognize them because they're like kitted up, and it doesn't happen. It's maybe 1% at most of customers, but it happens.
Yeah.
And it's exciting, but we don't try and push that.
Do you ever worry about like the stock of used bikes drying up, or do you just feel like there's enough supply?
That's a good question, because that's like the number one unknown when people look at this from the outside. They're like, where do you get your bikes? That's the number one question we get from customers or even people who are not patrons of the shop. And that was a question in my mind too. It's been a lot of trial and error. We are in this weird spot where we very much have the problem of too much supply. Don't know specifically if this would be the case in like a very rural area. I'm about 40 minutes north of DC. I am convinced that if you are within a major city or inside of about an hour drive, that odds are there are so many bikes out there. You just need to divert the flow of them towards you. And naturally, when you first start a shop and you have a little bit less of a community, you know, I was doing a lot of driving around and picking up individual bikes on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Also, I apologize. We have an industrial elevator in the back, and somebody's using it right now. It's a little bit of background noise. But at this point in time, we take in only 2 or 3 out of every 10 bikes that are brought to us for trade-in. So we have much more supply than there even is demand. I have learned to mitigate against that well becoming dry, because it can become a little bit dry at times. It's a really smart idea to have a good backlog. You know, I keep 30, 40, or 50 bikes ready to go in storage, because we do have these weird seasons of maybe a month, maybe 2 months, where it's like, hey, nobody's come in and offered a trade-in for like 6 weeks. And then we have the opposite, which we're actually experiencing a bubble right now. Everybody's coming in to trade in their bike, which is a little unusual. You don't usually see that this time of year. But we're getting to this point where we're like, oh, we're running out of space. So we'll take advantage of those moments at times where we'll be like, hey, let's get some backlog of bikes for when the well's drier.
Yeah.
But in my experience, the longer that I've been here, the more people are finding us that they don't even have an interest in buying a bike. They just want to sell one to us. And maybe you could speculate that some of that comes from the name that we chose for our shop. Because I think just looking through our Google Analytics data, we do have a considerable amount of web traffic that's coming from people who are looking for recycling. Like they're not Googling something that's pertinent to bikes, but they find us anyways. And then they end up giving us a call and they're like, hey, I have a bike in the garage. Do you guys buy them? So that's been another kind of happy accident. But, long answer short, no, we don't really struggle. I would suspect we actually struggle maybe less than some of the new shops have with the supply chain issues in the past couple of years.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about YouTube.
Sure.
What was your initial motivation for starting the YouTube channel, and like what's your goals with it?
Like a lot of people, I consume a lot of YouTube over cable, and I feel like I've noticed in the past 6 to 12 months, or maybe even longer, that people are becoming increasingly interested in watching more raw, organic content. And I think the idea of making videos is something that has knocked in my brain once or twice over the years. But that hurdle has always been, I do not want to sit on a computer for hours on end and try and learn the craft of doing these high quality edits. And basically, I feel like I've slowly been given permission. Bike Farmer was a big inspiration in that I feel like he definitely takes the angle of like, I don't want to be a videographer. I just want to turn the camera on. I want to do my thing and see who watches. And he's had a lot of success with that. And I've seen that with a lot of channels across YouTube. And I think slowly I ended up giving myself permission to be like, okay, I don't need to produce something of like subjective quality. I just need to choose a topic and roll with it. And the other kind of thought that I had in getting into this is I've seen some channels out there that are tied to businesses that do pretty well on YouTube without garnering that large of an audience because they're focusing on one really, really niche problem, and they can solve that problem for the few people out there. And YouTube's algorithm has gotten good enough where it's going to find those people. Like I'm pretty blown away. It's amazing. Like a lot of the bike related channels that I watch, I've had some level of communication with them. So even though I don't have a large number of videos out there, YouTube's good enough at categorizing it and putting it in front of the right eyeballs. So that kind of motivated me. I was like, okay, I think I have something that could solve a unique problem for a few people. And YouTube might be a good mechanism for getting that solution in front of the right eyeballs. And so the thing that I've built, and I've done so with the help of a sales associate of mine that's worked with me for many years. Him and I actually built basically a digital download of my brain as far as all of the standard operating procedures and the math behind the decisions that have been made in this business to make it successful. We have bounced all kinds of ideas. We started looking at, do we franchise? We quickly realized that that's a no-go. That's a horrendously expensive and very like legally tied up process. It's very granular, and you probably want 3 or 4 successful locations before you make that move. And then we started looking at, well, what about licensing? And I had some sit downs with people trying to learn. It's like, what would this look like if I just packaged up the business model that is Recycles Bikes and I gave it to somebody along with like access to me so that they could start their own business using the same practices and they could have my experience in their pocket. Basically coaching, I guess you would call it that. And so kind of explored that avenue. Again, there were some pros and cons to it, and we settled on, what's the easiest way to distribute something like this? We made a bunch of modules that were connected to our website, but we just put them behind a password. And YouTube has their Patreon-like service, the memberships, as you know. And right now we have it tied to that. Maybe in the future, we will decide to use Patreon or another service. That's kind of the goal of this YouTube channel, is try and make a resource that would have been helpful for me 10 years ago. And if somebody decides that they want to learn more and they want to deep dive into, hey, I'm going to hop out of the garage and start a brick and mortar, or I'm just going to start from scratch, hopefully we can provide them resources at a really low entry point. And it's also economical for us too. It's still so early. The channel's pulling in about 500-600 a month, which that's thrilling to me. Because I'm trying to also not get caught in the, what is it doing now, and look more so at what's the potential long term. And it's random, I guess. We'll see. It feels like one video could double or triple the thing that you're doing. And so my thought process is just stay consistent. And if you get enough volume over time, then inevitably one of them will strike. Mm-hmm. And we'll see. I don't know. It's weird because I have gotten a considerable number of questions from people asking about YouTube. And my honest answer is like, I am flying in the dark. I started doing this 2 months ago.
Is it bike shops that are curious, or just
bike shops, or other people in general, just in comments here and there? And I'm like, oh, I am not an authority on that topic. If you ask me about how to run a used bike shop, I got answers for you. But YouTube is a big black box to me, largely. I still feel like I'm opening it up and seeing what's inside.
Yeah, I feel like it's I feel like lots of bike shops invest in different social media platforms, but YouTube probably has the best potential for actual return and stickiness, because you can make evergreen content that people are going to constantly discover. It really builds, the know, like, and trust funnel a lot stronger than like a single Instagram post or because people get to know you, your personality. Do I get along with this person? Do I trust this person? And then they're more willing to do business with you. And
right.
I've actually been surprised at how few bike shops use YouTube or use YouTube well. Like some will, create a promotional video and put it up and treat it like the cinema, but don't really add value to the viewer. So yeah.
It is really fascinating to me because, we have a Facebook and Instagram account, and we've been, I want to say, semi-consistent on there since the beginning. And it generates something, but not as much as you would really want as a return if you were going to invest a lot of time into making Facebook and Instagram posts. But I think the hurdle for me, I don't know if other people feel this, I never thought of YouTube as a method for promoting my business because it's a local business. And YouTube obviously pushes out to everywhere. But we have had people stop in the store in the last 2 months because they saw a YouTube video, which has really blown my mind. And like you said, it's one sticky thing that sits there as evergreen content that can keep doing that for you forever. And it's a lot more personal. So it really seems like a supercharged platform compared to Facebook or Instagram.
We're actually going to start helping a local bike shop here in Spain with their YouTube channel. So it'd
Oh,
be
cool.
super excited to put all the things I've learned and see if I can help them as a business. So it'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah. What's been your angle with YouTube, if you don't mind me asking? Like, what was the thing that made you think, okay, I'm going to do this? And was there any kind of like business behind it that you had in mind?
What made me start was the kinds of bikes or the way of talking about bikes that I was interested in, I didn't see represented. And I thought for sure, like, okay, if I see bikes like this, there must be other people. So I just generate content around the things I like. And initially, there was no business plan behind it.
Okay.
And it
Well,
wasn't.
sometimes that's how to have the most fun starting
and
out.
and I feel like I'm actually, it helped me find my voice without any like the pressure to make money right away. It helped me be authentic because I feel like there's some people that get into it now and within their second video there's like affiliate links and brand deals and then it just feels like they're doing it for the money,
Yeah.
which is a fine thing to do. But for the to be able to do it long term, I feel like you have to come at it from like you're trying to serve the viewer. You always try to
Yeah.
provide value. Otherwise, if you're just chasing the dollars, there's so many ups and downs, it'll just burn you
Yeah.
out. And if you break it down like minimum wage, there's far better things far better ways you can spend your time than doing YouTube videos.
Yeah. I'll be honest in that I feel that tug because that is why I started the channel, is like I hope that I could at some point get an ROI from this.
Mm-hmm.
But I am already having that internal struggle where I'm like, okay, I need to keep my framework as simple as possible. And what I've come to is every video, just pretend you're sending it to yourself 10 years ago. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's one topic you can put into one video that would be helpful? And I think that has helped me a little bit.
Yeah, I think you have a great approach. It's like you want the minimum viable production value to get your message across.
Yes.
Because anything else on top of that, that's just added work, and a lot of people don't care. What they want is like the message and the content. At least I think for a lot of YouTube viewers.
Yeah. And especially, I think if you are an education-based channel,
Mm-hmm.
rather than entertainment, then
Right.
there's probably a little bit less value in all the crazy edits that you could do, and which, as you said, adds up to a lot of extra time.
Yeah, there's this one really like successful like car YouTuber. I think it's Doug DeMiro, but he literally shoots his videos with like an old camcorder. And he doesn't have a head editor or anything, but the guy makes millions, and he's got like a platform where people sell and buy cars, and he gets a cut off of that.
Oh, it's funny.
But he was on the interview, and they're like, well, why don't you can afford like a full-on team and a nicer camera? Why don't you do that? He's like, well, once you go down that road, you can't walk it back. There's like that.
There's a lot of wisdom in that statement.
There's that expectation. So, he's like, I could do it, but then I'm going to have to do it for every other video. It's going to have to get bigger and bigger. And it's not what I want to do.
I think about that with like Mr. Beast. If you're just looking at the largest right at the top, like, I wonder if he has as much fun now as he was when it was just like him and his friends. Because I cannot imagine like what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, cool. Well, I'm super excited that you're on YouTube. Great to finally touch base. I'm excited about what you're doing. I feel like it's such a unique angle, just from the presentation, from that aspect of bike shops, rather than just a super high-end bikes, which I feel like gets the lion's share of attention all the time.
Right.
And it's cool that you can find success, through a different path. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh yeah, I really appreciate it. Like I said, I feel a little bit starstruck. It's kind of awesome that within a span of a few months, we ended up getting connected. I've been watching your channel for years, and I appreciate what you do.
If you guys enjoyed this interview, definitely check out our playlist with our podcast. We've got years of interesting interviews from different personalities and bike businesses in the industry that you typically won't hear from in mainstream cycling media. And if you guys appreciate that, then please consider joining us on Patreon. It gives us the budget, the breadth, and the room to make content like this. And thanks everybody, and keep the supple side down.